Hey, Jerry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Bob. I'm trying to get Mike McCroskey on. He says he's holding admitted. Thanks.
He said, yeah. Nobody can. Yeah. Are you there, Peter?
Here.
Oh, yeah. So according to mine, it says you're screen sharing, and you can't see it.
Yeah. It says I'm viewing your screen. I just don't see anything.
Well. Okay, I don't know what the problem is. I mean, I could talk and do my thing, but without seeing the slides and without seeing the videos, it's not going to be quite as good.
This is Jerry Mannheim. I'm seeing you.
Are you seeing my slides?
I am not seeing slides.
Okay, well, there's some glitch. What's not presenting me from allowing me to share.
Now you're on my full screen, and Jeff Warmer, and that's it. Don't see anything else.
Yeah. On my screen, I can see Jeff, Jerry, and SABR Virtual, and I guess Gerald. Decide yourself.
Okay.
Well, I'm looking at 10 faces and 3, I assume audios only. Dave Newman, well, now I'm down. Yeah, Dave Newman, Tom Steik, and Ted Knorr. I'm seeing audio, and now I've got 9 pictures.
Me too, plus one big picture on the other side of the screen.
Correct.
If you're only seeing a few screens, you can hit the widen your screen. Sometimes it'll put the other people on.
Super support system and super coachable. Deshaun is 2 of those, but he doesn't have the support system. Once you get the quarterback and coach right, just everything else works. You draft a rookie running back from LSU. I mean, I like him. He's that good? First game? Sammy Watkins, no, they kind of overpaid for him. Nah, Mahomes and Andy Reid make it work. Honey Badger, do you have anything left in the tank? That worked too. Sam Darnold was way better than Josh Allen all through high school and college. But when you watch him now, who wins? You can be coachable. You can work hard and be talented.
On your view options at the top middle of the screen, there's a side-by-side thing. If you click it at the bottom, where you can get everybody.
Incredible safety net of coaching.
Top middle.
Executives. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. Because he uttered this sentence: I want to play for the New York Giants, not the San Diego Chargers. And that's probably why, no shot at the Chargers, Phillip Rivers will not be.
Peter, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but no screen sharing, so I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah. All right, let's do this. Why don't you do a talk? And if we don't get this by the end, we'll reset for another time where you can do your complete thing. How's that?
So I'll just do a talk for now then?
There's 17 games.
Okay, I can do that. No.
53 yards. It marked the 4th time in 17 games. Odell Beckham.
So somebody has to mute themselves.
4th time he had yardage in the 20s. 6 times in 17 games. He's had.
Tom, do you have the radio on?
Hello?
Yeah, I think we're good. When Tom mutes, it seems to go away.
Okay, and I try it again sharing. You still can't see any slides, right?
Correct.
Okay, so can you see my face?
Yes.
All right, so I'll just do a straight talk without any video, and like I have slides, quite a few, and I was going to show some videos, and I guess we could maybe reset, and then I could do something shorter at another time where we show the slides. I'll go through it briefly and show the videos. The videos are pretty key to the presentation, but if that's the best we can do now, I guess that's what we'll do. Is that what you want to do, Peter? Hello? Hello? Oh boy. Hello? Oh, jeez.
Peter must be muted again.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay, do you want me just to talk then and do that?
Go ahead, Jared. Just do what we can, and then we'll just
Okay.
re-up.
All right, so you can see me all right at least? Can you see me?
I can see you.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so I'll just do a talk and we'll reset and do the video stuff later. Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead then. How are we going to do for time, by the way? It's about 12:22 right now. Peter? Oh. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, all right, well, I'll start.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so let's, I'll just do a straight presentation. So when you think of superstars, who comes to mind? All right, so if we're talking about athletes, it might be, you know, Michael Jordan basketball, could be boxer Muhammad Ali, who passed away a few years ago, but his star is still with us, of course. If you're talking about movies, you know, it could be a Meryl Streep or a Katharine Hepburn. If we're talking about the financial world, it could be somebody like Warren Buffett who comes to mind. Now, what about newspaper columnists? Well, one of the biggest ones today is George F. Will. He writes for the Washington Post. He's a syndicated columnist who's won the Pulitzer Prize. And you could call George F. Will a superstar columnist. Well, George Will called the guy I'm going to talk about today, the namesake of your chapter, the first national superstar. 100 years after his birth, Hofstra University held a conference about him, and they said he's still a major influence on things intellectual, educational, and cultural. In 2012, which is now 8 years ago, a jersey that he wore sold at auction for $4.4 million, a Guinness World Record for an item of sports memorabilia. And last summer, that record was broken when another one of his old jerseys sold for $5.64 million. It was an auction right at Yankee Stadium. In 2017, the Smithsonian in Washington held an exhibit of photos and artwork about him and his life. And they do this sort of thing for people like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And they did one on him. The curator at the Smithsonian, a PhD in history no less, told me to my face, he's the most famous American name in the world. So I'm talking, of course, about George Herman Babe Ruth. Now, that was quite a statement coming from the curator at the Smithsonian. So Ruth's impact and legacy goes far beyond baseball and sport. It involves history, culture, the arts, and most definitely business branding and marketing. In fact, you could say that he was a marketing machine who set the mold. The fact is that any organization today that wants to build a name for itself, sell a product, or deliver a service can actually learn a lot from Babe Ruth. Consider this. The guy smothered America with his presence at a time when there were no computers, no internet, no social media, no iPhones. There wasn't even TV. But he made himself a legend, and there was a lot more to it than myth. So how did he do it? So I want to tell you about Babe Ruth and his impact on many fronts and how he made history. And as I say, not just on the baseball field. Now, sure, he hit all his home runs from inside the box, the batter's box, but this guy was also thinking outside the box. I'm talking about the way he used words, his sense of humor and timing, his sense of place and purpose, how he reached out to people. And by that, I mean to the masses and even to targeted groups. This guy may have invented the whole concept of market segmentation. He was a trendsetter and a visionary. And I think Ruth, maybe more than any other person, was able to use fact and fiction and achieve his objectives, and in that way build a legend. Babe Ruth created a brand that has endured all these years, and it continues to generate recognition today. And that's why companies like IBM, Nike, Citibank, Mercedes, and countless other companies use him to sell products right to this day. So what is a brand? I'll give you a definition. I'm going to read this. A brand is a combination of attributes. communicated through a name or symbol that influences the mind of an audience and creates value. The value of a brand resides in the promise that the product or service will deliver. So, thinking about that definition of a brand, Gene Krupa was the Babe Ruth of drummers. Warren Buffett, whom I mentioned a moment ago, is the Babe Ruth of investors. They called Gordie Howe the Babe Ruth of hockey and Johnny Carson the Babe Ruth of late night talk show TV. Now, I don't know anyone else whose name is used like that. The name Babe Ruth means excellence. It means the best. The question is, why? Well, to answer that question, think of this concept, business value proposition. When consumers buy something, they want safety, security, and sustainability. And Babe Ruth is all that. But more than anything, consumers want trust. And he hit that one right out of the park. So that's why he delivers even today, more than 70 years after his death. Now, make no mistake, Ruth was a business all by himself, though he had a lot of help from people like Christy Walsh, who was the first sports agent. And I'll get back to Walsh in a moment. But the fact is that Babe Ruth set the mold for celebrity and in many ways for the entire concept of marketing. He was a guy ahead of his time. So why do I say that? Well, let's look at a few things. First of all, Babe Ruth knew exactly who he was and what he was. He knew he wasn't just a baseball player, but actually a performer. He knew that baseball wasn't only a national pastime, but was part of the very fabric of America. Keep in mind, this was a time when we didn't have the competition from other team sports like we do today. Baseball was pretty well lit. So he knew what he was selling, the product. Another point, he knew something about marketing that, the big shots in the commissioner's office didn't know. In those days, Major League Baseball had only 16 teams. St. Louis was the furthest west. So Babe Ruth went on his famous barnstorming tours where he took other Major League players with him, but of course he was the biggest name. And they went as far as California, visiting cities and towns that didn't have big league teams of their own. So he was spreading the product, spreading the brand, winning over new converts. What did baseball do? Well, we all know baseball fined him and suspended him for barnstorming. Another point I want to make in terms of why he was unique and a visionary, he was a man of principle in many ways. He stuck to his guns. He knew what he was worth in terms of money, and he got it. And he stood up to the owners on matters of race. And this is something that hasn't really got a lot of attention. Babe Ruth recognized that the old Negro leagues had a lot of very good ball players that people wanted to see. He played with and against both Black and Latino players as early as 1918 when he was still with the Red Sox. And he did that throughout his career, much to the chagrin of Major League Baseball. People have told me, starting with members of the Ruth family, that the reason he never became a manager after his playing days were over was because he would have advocated the hiring of Black ball players at a time of segregation. We all know Jackie Robinson made his appearance in '47, and Ruth died 1 year later in '48. And I'll return to that in a moment. So the point I want to make is Babe Ruth knew his market, he knew his audience, he knew that history doesn't sell, but nostalgia does. And it must, because he's still selling like gangbusters today. He also understood that first you sell the celebrity and then you sell the product. Now, Roger Angell, I think a week or so ago, he just turned 100 years old, if you can believe it, 100 years old. He's probably the most famous baseball writer in the world. And in the same way that George Will called Ruth the first national superstar, Roger Angell called Babe Ruth the model for modern celebrity. So let's go back to the time of Ruth. What was the world like? We're talking 1920s, 100 years ago. There was a new type of stardom emerging that combined personality with marketing and technology. And like Roger Angell says, Babe Ruth was the model. You had, now again, roaring 20s, you had moving pictures for the first time and the transmission of the human voice. This was new technology. And the result, Babe Ruth was probably the most famous person in America. But the formula still applies today: personality, marketing, and technology. The technology, though, I mean, it's changed a lot. It's changing by the day, and a lot of companies, as we all know, COVID aside, have struggled to keep up. So while there was no online world when Ruth was around, I said there wasn't even TV, there are still things we can learn from the first marketing superstar. Now, I've been studying Babe Ruth for over 25 years, ever since I started research for what was actually my first novel, was called Gift of the Bambino. And if I could do my slides, I would show you the book here. So basically, it was a work of fiction about a young boy and his grandfather and how they were bound by baseball and the spirit of Babe Ruth. I just tried the slides again, but I'm assuming nobody can see them. Okay, so that came out in Canada in 2002, and it came out in the States, St. Martin's Press in 2004 as a hardcover book. A story about a boy and his grandfather say how they're bound by baseball and the spirit of Babe Ruth. So it was really like a coming of age book. And I did a lot of research on Babe Ruth to write that, even though it was a work of fiction. And then 2 years ago, I came out with a nonfiction book, Babe Ruth, a Superstar's Legacy. And it's really the first book about the legacy of Ruth, and it goes far beyond baseball. The foreword was written by Tom Stevens, Babe Ruth's grandson. And I go through it chapter by chapter. I was at the Babe Ruth Museum a couple of years ago and did a presentation. I think Peter's familiar with the book. And we go through the various elements of the book about the enigma of Ruth. I have a chapter where I had spent an afternoon with Julia Ruth Stevens, Ruth's daughter, who passed away just a year and a half ago at the age of 102, when she was living in Conway, New Hampshire. And I spent an afternoon with her, and that afternoon is really boiled down into a chapter in the book, which I call Daddy's Girl. I talk about how the legacy began and start after his death in 1948. We get into Cooperstown, where he's still to this day the face of Cooperstown, which is amazing when you consider he last played a game in 1935. I also have a chapter about the Babe Ruth Museum and the journey of Michael Gibbons, who was very helpful to me with research going back several years. A chapter on the Babe Ruth League, not-for-profit baseball, softball organization, boys, girls. It's all over the States. They have an international World Series. They have 1 million participants and 2 million volunteers. They've had obviously a different summer this year with COVID, but you have something like 3 million people involved in the Babe Ruth League, so that's pretty significant. I also get into the name of Babe Ruth and how it's used for endorsements, and have a couple chapters on the business of sports memorabilia, where Ruth is far and away the #1 figure in the world. In fact, when I was doing my research, I came across a website of the 15 most valuable items of sports memorabilia ever, from any sport in the world, any country in the world, any athlete in the world. 7 of the top 15 items were all Babe Ruth items. I also do a chapter in the 2012 auction that resulted in the sale of his jersey for $4.4 million. And again, that record was broken last year. One of the people I interviewed was Ryozo Kato, who was the former Japanese ambassador to the United States until 2008. And then he became the commissioner of Nippon Professional Baseball. That's the big leagues in Japan. And he told me about Ruth's impact in Japan, and he called it the Babe Ruth effect. So that chapter is about Ruth's impact beyond the United States in different countries around the world. And there's a chapter called The Legend, the Hero, the Man, which gets into some of the statues and plaques about Ruth that are also in quite a few different countries. So let's talk a little bit about the impact of Ruth beyond baseball. And in talking about that, I want to talk about a perfect storm. Ruth was traded from the Red Sox to the Yankees beginning of 1920, 100 years ago. So what was the world like? And I'll tell you why I think it's a perfect storm. First, you have the dawn of the Roaring 20s. It was a time of new technologies, like I said. Another new technology was the teletype machine, which let you transmit information, news instantaneously, things like baseball scores. You had the emergence of national products like Coca-Cola. You had a huge expenditure in advertising. Advertising and public relations were 2 industries that came of age, and it was all geared to this phenomenon of consumption, products for people to consume. That's what it was about. Also, keep in mind, America and its allies had just come out of the Great War, World War I, so there was this compelling sense of excitement and energy in the air. So that's the first element of the perfect storm. Then you have the place, New York City. At one time, believe it or not, New York City had 18 daily newspapers all going at the same time, 18. And sports was taking up a lot of space in them at the time. And of course, New York was also where people came to make their dreams come true. And this was especially true in the Roaring '20s. And the third element of the perfect storm is you had Babe Ruth, his dynamic, colorful, charismatic personality, and all these things came together and a legend was born. So how did he do it? Well, for starters, he did it with words. Never let the fear of striking out get in the way. Now, think about that. It's a baseball term, but it's an analogy that goes far beyond baseball. There's a website called BabeRuthCentral.com. It's run by Brent Stevens, Babe Ruth's grandson. And they have a company called BR Goods. So BR Goods sells t-shirts with Babe's famous sayings emblazoned across the chest. And, you know, like never let the fear of striking out get in the way, or every strike brings me closer to the next home run. Now, that's inspirational. And the inspiration of Babe Ruth was prominent in those days and is still prominent today. I want to tell you a little story. In 2014,
What's that website?
It's BabeRuthCentral.com. BabeRuthCentral.com. It's run by Brent Stevens, who's the great grandson of Babe Ruth. There's a lot of information there. So I want to tell you a little story from 2014. Barry Cressman, he was the longtime pastor of a church called the First Presbyterian Church in Titusville, Pennsylvania. He was going to retire after 42 years on the pulpit. Now, this is a huge church with a huge congregation. I believe they have their own YouTube channel. So he was going to retire and he was going to do a special sermon. So what was his sermon about that day? He wanted to talk about failure. And in talking about failure, he was going to focus on Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth in a sermon about failure. And here's how the pastor began the sermon. He said, with the coming of spring, our thoughts turn to the great American sport of baseball. For those of us of a certain vintage, we invariably think of Babe Ruth as the great Sultan of SWAT. But did you know that Ruth struck out 1,330 times? And I find that significant. You and I also fail. But this is a pastor of a major church talking about this. In fact, we all know Babe Ruth had 714 home runs, but he also struck out 1,330 times. As we all know in baseball, that's still a pretty darn good ratio. But the point I want to make is Babe Ruth inspired the masses, and he still does. And some of the other t-shirts you can get at BR Goods, by the way, is I swing big with everything I got. I hit big or I miss big. I live as big as I can. And the #1 seller is it's hard to beat a person who never gives up. You can buy these shirts. I think it's for $20. So Babe Ruth was a guy who came from nothing and he made something of himself. And in that journey, he taught us some lessons. He had little formal education, both in school and in the greater realm of life. And yet, here we are in 2020, and he's still quoted and revered by world leaders, religious scholars, and leading thinkers. He was a source of inspiration and hope. And if there's a better story than Babe Ruth, I would like to know what it is. So what can we learn from him? Well, let's first start about humor. When it was pointed out that he made more money than the president, we all know his great response, I had a better year, right? I wonder what he would say now, but we won't get into that. Anyway, it wasn't rehearsed. It was natural. People liked Babe Ruth. He made them laugh, and he was a kind soul, and he was funny. Now, in my presentation, this is where I show a clip, and hopefully we can do this another time. In 1928, Harold Lloyd, a famous comedian and star of the silent screen, made a film called Speedy. In fact, this film was actually nominated for an Oscar that year. And in Speedy, there's a scene with Babe Ruth. So Harold Lloyd is a cab driver, taxi driver, who drives like a crazy maniac through the streets of Manhattan. And he has to pick up Babe Ruth. He's at an orphanage signing baseballs. And he has to rush him to Yankee Stadium for a game. And there's about a 4 or 5 minute sequence in there with Ruth in the back seat. And Ruth is just phenomenal in there, even though it's a silent film. And this is why photographers and producers, filmmakers, they love the guy because he was so responsive. And, you know, we see athletes who are, you know, wooden when they were doing commercials and so on. Well, Ruth wasn't like that at all. So I'd like to show a clip of that film, but we'll have to try to do that another time. I also like to show a commercial that the Yankees used just before the 2019 baseball season last year. You probably remember the story about their pitcher, Adam Ottavino, when he came to the Yankees, and he said he could strike out Babe Ruth. He could have struck out Babe Ruth every time. Well, that got him into some hot water, but the Yankees decided to put him in a commercial. where he's dreaming about facing Babe Ruth, and you can guess what happened. It's a 40-second commercial. It's pretty funny. Another thing about Ruth in terms of his humor, late in his career when he was asked about retirement, this is what he said. He said, all ball players should quit when it starts to feel as if the baselines run uphill. And another thing he said was, yesterday's home runs don't win today's games, which is another way of saying, what have you done for me lately? And by the way, that quote is the very first one listed on this website that's all about marketing. Yesterday's home runs don't win today's games. So when we go back to Ruth, he was born pretty much dirt poor. He really didn't have any education to speak of, grade 7 or grade 8, excuse me. And his childhood was right out of a Dickens novel. He was rough around the edges, but you put it all together and the guy could identify with people and empathize with people, and they could with him as well. And he also had some pretty tangible virtues. I'm talking about things like honesty, charity. He was a great philanthropist, and a complete sense of unselfishness. You know, I had met people years ago who actually knew Babe Ruth, and other people had things to do with him. And they've never heard anyone tell me they didn't like Babe Ruth, even players who played against him on other teams. There was no pretense with the guy. And if you're talking about marketing, think for a moment, think about marketing without pretense. He was also good at focusing on the objective. Now, anyone who hits home runs off major league pitching must know how to focus, but again, Ruth was in a special class, not only because of the number of homers he hit, but when he hit them. He had the record for most World Series home runs for almost 3 decades. And as a pitcher, he held the record for most consecutive innings without allowing a run for over 30 years. Of course, a great pitcher and a hitter. And we know as a pitcher for the Red Sox, he was on 3 World Series teams with the Red Sox, came to the Yankees, began the famous curse of the Bambino, where the Red Sox didn't win another one, I believe, for 86 years. When he came to the Yankees in 1920, they'd never been in the World Series, and they appeared in 7 and won 4 with him. So the guy was a winner. The World Series followed him around. Another thing about where people can learn from Babe Ruth is the ability to deal with distractions. Take the 1932 World Series in Chicago at the Cubs, where he hit his famous called shot home run. The Cub players were literally in his face, taunting him. The fans were throwing things at him. He allegedly points to the fence, hits one out, and the Yankees, of course, win the series. Another good example, you've probably heard the phrase attributed to Jacob Ruppert, but apparently incorrectly attributed him, that Ruth couldn't manage because he didn't know how to manage himself. In 1934, the American League All-Stars went on a tour of Japan. Ruth was 39, declining ability. He never again actually would play with the Yankees. It was after the season in 1934. But Babe Ruth was the MVP of that series. 17 games, he hit 13 home runs, and he managed the All-Star team. He was the manager of the team. So this is a time when US-Japanese relations were not good. Ruth was the manager, the best player on the team, and the ultimate ambassador for America. Even America's ambassador to Japan said Ruth was a better ambassador than he could have been. And today there are statues and plaques honoring Ruth in Japan. So what kind of impact did the guy have? Well, you've probably heard that the battle cry for Japanese troops when they were storming US Marines in the Battle of the Pacific was to hell with Babe Ruth. Wasn't to hell with Abraham Lincoln or George Washington or FDR, it was to hell with Babe Ruth. The most insulting thing they could say to American Marines. Now here's something else about the war that you may not know. In 1945, when Nazi Germany was defeated, but the Japanese still refused to surrender, the US State Department actually considered making a recording of Babe Ruth's voice to play it over the airwaves to urge the Japanese to surrender. Now think about that. That's pretty amazing. As it turned out, they didn't do it, but what if they had? Babe Ruth would have changed history. So how big was he? Well, today we have sports writers who cover teams. Marshall Hunt was a writer with the New York Daily News, and guess what his beat was? His beat was Babe Ruth. That was it. And Ruth kept him busy. Now, at this point, I like to show some slides where I talk about Robert Ripley, the famous cartoonist who later started Ripley's Believe It or Not. In the New York Evening News, 1922, he had a full-page drawing of Babe Ruth, where he called him the modern colossus. So I like to show that. I show magazine covers, Vanity Fair, Popular Science magazine. They analyzed the dynamics of his swing. He was on covers everywhere. The most talked about, watched, covered person in the country, if not even the world. Now, I mentioned Christy Walsh, Ruth's agent. Babe Ruth was the first athlete to have an agent, the first athlete to have his own personal trainer as well. Walsh was a cartoonist and an advertising guy. He actually lost his job at one point and decided he was going to ghost for some famous athletes. He started with Babe Ruth. He ultimately developed a syndicate of 34 writers who were ghosting for all kinds of athletes, most of them baseball players, but not only baseball players, but Ruth was the biggest. And Walsh helped associate Ruth's name with excellence, and it stuck because Babe Ruth sold everything. And then again, into some of the products that he sold. And I've never seen an athlete or maybe any celebrity who sold as many things as Babe Ruth did. Before a game, he would go into a showroom at an automobile dealership and be there for 2 hours. He'd actually be selling cars. That's what the kind of thing that he did. But the thing about Walsh and Ruth is this. Walsh's syndicate wound up in 1938 and he died in 1955. But Babe Ruth still lives on today. It never stopped with the guy even after he died. Now we talk about the Babe Ruth League, a not-for-profit baseball league. It got going in 1952 with the help of Ruth's widow, Claire. This was 4 years after he died. It was called the Little Bigger League. They wanted to change the name to the Babe Ruth League, and of course it took off. The Babe Ruth Museum and Birthplace, Peter is involved with. I believe that started in 1974. Mike Gibbons was a documentary film producer, got involved, and was only going to be there, I think, for a year or so, but it turned out to be something like 37. 1976, Ruth was on the cover of Time magazine. This is 28 years after his death. Why? New York Yankee Stadium had just been refurbished, and they had a big drawing of Ruth sitting on the roof with the fans coming under his legs through the doors. Now, Reggie Jackson was pretty big with the Yankees then and others, but Babe Ruth is the one they put on the cover of Time magazine. 1983, U.S. Postal Service put him on a 20-cent stamp. 1995, Hofstra University had the conference about him. Baseball and the Sultan of Swat. And I was at that conference, and that was the first time I ever met Tom Stevens, and Julie was there. This is 1995, commemorating the 100th anniversary of Ruth's birth, 1895. So one of the guys who was there, or at least there was a video of him there, was Ralph Keiner, the former home run king. He had a lot of home runs, of course, a big slugger. He was retired, of course, at this time. And they asked Keiner, they said, Mr. Keiner, if Babe Ruth was playing today, 1995, if he was playing today, how many home runs do you think he would hit? Keiner said, well, about 20. And the questioner said, 20, is that all? And Keiner said, yeah, but you got to understand, the guy would be 100 years old. So it's not too bad. Anyway, that was at the Hofstra conference, a 3-day conference. And, they had a physicist doing a session there, getting into the dynamics of Babe Ruth's swing. That's how fine this conference was. It was, I think Mel Allen was there too. It was pretty amazing. 1996, Babe Ruth statue at Camden Yards in Baltimore, where the Orioles play. 16-foot bronze statue of Babe Ruth. He, of course, a native of Baltimore. Susan Lurie was the sculptress who put that together, and I spent some time with her, and she told me how getting that commission changed her life. And the interesting thing about her is that at that time when she got the commission in 1995, this is a woman who had never attended a baseball game in her life at that point, which was pretty amazing. But she started doing a lot of research, got to know the Ruth family, and then she did the big 16-foot statue of Ruth, which is the biggest statue of Ruth anywhere in the world. 1998, put on a 32-cent stamp by the U.S. Postal Service. 2002, statue of Babe Ruth in Sendai City, Japan. This was a site of one of those games from that 1934 tour. Ruth had hit 2 home runs in that game, and they made a statue of him in 2002. Okay, so I mentioned about the Japanese, the battle cry, to hell with Babe Ruth. So the question I want to ask is, how can a baseball player have such an impact? And the reason is because Babe Ruth had a brand, and he still has that brand today. In 2006, I was involved in this here in Toronto, where I live. We call our SABR chapter the Hamlin's Point chapter, because in 1914, Babe Ruth, pitcher for the Providence Grays, hit his first official professional home run in a AAA minor league game playing against the Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team at an old stadium, Hanlon's Point in the Toronto Islands. So we made a plaque. We had president of the Toronto Blue Jays, Paul Godfrey. The Yankees were in town playing the Blue Jays that day, and members of both teams were involved. And we had a ceremony at Hanlon's Point where we erected a plaque. It gave me this idea. This was at the birthday party. They had a big poster of Mount Rushmore, and Babe Ruth was one of the faces of Mount Rushmore. And I remember it was Mike Gibbons who told me, he said, if there was a Mount Rushmore of Americans, not just baseball players or athletes, but Americans, Babe Ruth would be on it. So the point I want to make is Babe Ruth is still relevant. Now, the Luminary Group in Indiana is a firm that represents dead celebrities and their estates. And this is for sponsorships and promotions. Their biggest client today, guess who? Babe Ruth. I said Ruth is #1 in sports collecting. If we go back to that 2012 auction that sold his jersey for $4.4 million, well, that was almost twice what it cost to build Yankee Stadium in 1923. It cost $2.4 million. So, you know, how is this possible? It's possible because we're talking about Babe Ruth. And if you even want to think about Babe Ruth as an investment, Warren Buffett should probably recommend Babe Ruth as an investment. I'll tell you why. During the 20th century, the stock market grew at an annual or average rate of 10.4% a year. That's over 100 years, so that's pretty good. But it's not as good as Babe Ruth. If we consider that Yankee jersey from 2020 that sold for $4.4 million in 2012, 1920 was Ruth's first season on Broadway. He had 54 home runs. I think he set a record for RBIs. He was hitting more home runs than almost every team in baseball. Also that year, attendance at Yankee Stadium, or not Yankee Stadium, it was Polo Grounds, attendance doubled from the previous year, more than doubled, and it was all because of Babe Ruth. The Yankees became the first team in any sport to draw over 1 million fans in one season. And it was all because of Babe Ruth. So what was his Yankee jersey worth in 1920? Well, in those days, players had to pay their team a deposit of $30 beginning of the season to pay for the uniform. It's not like today. And now if we use that as a measuring stick, over the course of 100 years, that Ruth jersey would have earned an annual rate of return of about 12.6%, which outperforms the stock market. And what about the Yankees franchise? In 1915, the team was sold for a few $100,000. In 2017, just over 100 years later, Forbes pegged the value of the Yankees at $3.7 billion. That's pretty good growth. But don't forget that a good chunk of that growth was due to one player, Babe Ruth, in the 20s and 30s. And they even had to build a new stadium for him. So no matter how you cut it, Babe Ruth is a good long-term investment. Now, what about companies that use him to sell product? I mentioned the ad that Mercedes used him in an ad that stressed value. Lipton's had him in a commercial about power. Financial institutions, banks, finance companies, they still use him because he embodies those qualities of safety, security, and sustainability. And those qualities have to be earned. I've got a list on one slide, which I guess we will show you next time, of companies that have used Ruth and still use him. And yeah, there's some big names: Sony, Chevrolet, Boeing, Bud Light, Mercedes-Benz, Pepsi. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's just an unbelievably long list. So another part of his legacy, before I conclude, is I want to talk about that he was the first celebrity philanthropist. And he supported countless charities. In the state of Florida alone, he supported something like 70 different charities. So he was very much a philanthropist. In fact, in 2010, 10 years ago, he was inducted into the World Sports Humanitarian Hall of Fame in Boise, Idaho. So that's part of his brand too. And as far as the issue of race is concerned, there's this painting I like to show. And this is quite a cool story. We all know Josh Gibson, who was known as the Black Babe Ruth. He had over 800 home runs, but never got a chance to play because of segregation. A number of years ago, 10, 12 years ago, Brent Stevens, the great-grandson of Babe Ruth, was at a wedding. I think it was in Florida, I believe, and he met Sean Gibson, the great-grandson of Josh Gibson. They became friends, and they commissioned a painting. And they had a painting made of Babe Ruth and Josh Gibson in their uniforms on a field together, which of course never happened. And they made limited edition prints and sold these prints, and the proceeds went to the Babe Ruth League, not for profit. and the Josh Gibson Foundation for Underprivileged Kids in Pittsburgh. So I think it's a pretty cool story. So finally, what do people say about Babe Ruth today? Well, James Barber, the curator at the Smithsonian, he said he's the most famous American name in the world. Joe Orlando, one of the top executives in the sports memorabilia industry. There's Babe Ruth and there's everyone else. Pete Enfield, president of the Luminary Group, which handles the Ruth name and estate. He said from a licensing perspective, for a sports legend, he is at the very top. Bill Jenkinson, baseball author and historian, who also gave the eulogy in 2008, 60th anniversary. He actually gave a eulogy for Ruth at that event at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Jenkinson said, "We should recognize his greatest contribution to our common American heritage. It wasn't the baseball records, but his legacy of hope." I mentioned George Will, the first national superstar, and Roger Angell, the model for modern celebrity. And Mike Gibbons, Babe Ruth Museum, he said he was a cultural icon, not a sports icon. So we've got a Babe Ruth podcast series. I think Peter mentioned he had seen it. We actually were releasing this in February, then COVID hit, so we've re-released it. It's a 4-part podcast series all about the impact and the legacy of Babe Ruth. And it gets into many different things in terms of business, culture, history, the arts. And we interview a number of people who I mentioned in my talk today, including members of the Ruth family like Tom Stevens and the daughter, Julia. That basically concludes my talk without the slides. So we'll have to set something up and do that. And I guess if you want to open up the questions, I'm happy to answer any questions. Peter? Okay.
This is Bob. This might be a little selfish, but are you open to do this kind of presentation for other SABR groups?
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah. I think I actually, when I was in Detroit for the Babe Ruth birthday party, I think it was February 1st, if I'm not mistaken. I actually spoke to the Detroit chapter then, did a presentation of them. That of course was in person. It was just before COVID. And then, so yeah, for sure. And I've spoken to the Hamlin's Point chapter in Toronto. So yeah, absolutely. At that birthday party, by the way, we were at a bar, sports bar. They had over 1,000 people go through that bar that night. I hope none of them had COVID. It was early February, but it was a pretty packed place, and it was quite a night. But yeah, absolutely, I'd be very happy to do it. Sure.
Okay, we represent the Houston chapter, and I'll get in touch with you separately.
Sure. No, that's fine. Yeah. No problem. Yeah. I also should mention that, I touch a lot about business branding and marketing, and I do presentations that are geared to business groups too, where it gets into what marketers and salespeople can learn from Babe Ruth, some of the things we can learn from him, because I say the guy was the master marketer, and he really did, set the mold. So I think there are lessons to be learned there for sure. But I can adapt the talk, to the group.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I had a occasion to visit Hot Springs, where they used to have the spring training.
Yeah.
And they had an alligator pit that supposedly Babe Ruth hit his first home run as a player when he was at Boston Red Sox. It was 473 feet from the old ball field, and they found it. It landed in a pit full of alligators. It was,
yeah,
the attraction is still there.
Yeah.
But it kind of also in that clip I watched, they started talking about the lively ball started coming in about the same time, right after the 1920 World Series.
Yeah.
Because of the 1919 fix got in there, and there weren't any runs scored in the 20 World Series.
Yeah.
Coincided with Babe Ruth starting to hit home runs in New York. And I just wonder if there was any other factors that, other than his natural talent, that got him to hit home runs, because apparently the ball has been lively since 1912.
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of talk about that, but I think the point is, in terms of impact, and we're talking baseball here, I think you can make the case. Is there any other athlete that impacted his or her sport so much in so short a period of time as Babe Ruth? If you look at, I think from something like 1919 to 1923, a 4 or 5 year period, the number of home runs in Major League Baseball increased by something like 400 to 500%. I mean, in its entirety, starting with Babe Ruth, but other players did too. I mean, he changed the way people played the game. He changed the way the game was played. You know, from the Ty Cobb system to the Babe Ruth system, and people liked it. So the impact is amazing. That and Hot Springs, they had an event there a couple years ago commemorating, or was it last year, commemorating, I think, 100 years of that home run, but 473 feet. So yeah, there's a sign there, and there's all kinds of places that claim they have Babe Ruth's first home run. There's that one. There's another one where I think his first home run in an interleague game when he was with the Red Sox. And here in Toronto, where I live, we talk about it too, because the first professional home run in an official league game in the minors, 1914, September 5th. So there's all these claims. But, you know, with Babe Ruth, I'm surprised they didn't say that the Hot Springs home run didn't wind up in an alligator's mouth. So, you know, it's that's the kind of story you have with Babe Ruth all the time. But that's quite an event. But I think, again, in terms of impact, I don't think there's any other athlete that impacted their sport as much as Ruth did, and certainly as much and as fast as he did from the 1919, 1923, 24, for sure.
Okay.
Yep. Any more?
I have just a quick story.
Yeah.
I was in England at a soccer game in 1971.
Yeah.
In those days, in the cheap seats, you stood. We're all packed together, and I'm talking to my neighbor, telling him I'm from America. The guy next to him says, "Why don't you go back and watch Babe Ruth?"
Oh, yeah.
I didn't take that as an insult.
Yeah, no. Well, I mentioned Tom Stevens, who wrote the foreword to my book. Now, Tom, well, actually, I think he's retired now, but he was an engineer, and he used to do a lot of work for the U.S. military around the world. And he, in the introduction, or the foreword of the book, rather, and he's told me this, he's been to places like Thailand, Afghanistan, for God's sake, and people know who Babe Ruth is. I mean, we're not just talking about, the Western world, we're talking about places like that. And they know who Babe Ruth is, and they know what he did. So he's an international superstar, and it goes beyond baseball and certainly goes beyond America. He's known everywhere. But again, you get back into the name, the Babe Ruth of this and the Babe Ruth of that. I don't know anyone else, did they say the Barry Bonds of something? Or for a while they were saying the Michael Jordan of this and that, but it didn't stick. With Babe Ruth, it sticks, and it sticks to this day. I don't want to get into politics, but it was a few weeks ago, I heard Donald Trump, someone referred, or in an article, they referred to Donald Trump as the Babe Ruth of liars. So, but they're using the name Babe Ruth, and that Babe Ruth always means number one, and to this day. And, the guy died in 1948, we're in 2020, and his brand is still there. And judging by the people who are all involved in the business, they tell me his star on his brand is still rising, which is incredible. So any more questions at all?
I always like to discuss what ifs. Suppose the Red Sox and that traded Ruth to the Yankees in beginning of 1920.
Yeah.
Would Babe Ruth been as famous? Or no, if the Red Sox had kept, then he eventually would have had to go to New York because that's the biggest market in the country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that trade was done, as we know, for financial considerations. Whenever famous athletes are traded, I'm a Canadian, hockey's a big sport. They traded Wayne Gretzky. It was for financial reasons. It wasn't because of their performance, for sure. But in Ruth's case, he was already converted to an everyday player. His last year with the Red Sox, 1919, he hit 29 homers. It was a new record. He was the biggest star in the game. If he had never gone to the Yankees, I think his impact in baseball probably would have been as significant because of the player he was. But Being in New York at that time in the 1920s, like I say, it was a perfect storm for creating a legend. So no, I don't think he would have been as big if he had stayed in Boston. Maybe inevitably he would have wound up in New York anyway, but those three things came together: the time, the place, and the personality of the guy. So it was like made in heaven for creating a legend. So being in New York is certainly what, you know, was the glue that got everything together there for sure.
Okay.
Any more? Okay. Peter, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Yeah.
What time we got? It's 1:10, guys. I know this wasn't what any of us had in mind. I've already been in touch with Jacob. So based on what Jerry's schedule is, obviously we already have a speaker for the Peeps at the Peep Talk first Wednesday in October, and somebody for the next Call Shot Lunch. Based on Jerry's schedule and what times are available for this Zoom call, since we use the SABR headquarters one, we'll do a third one next month and take it from there, and hopefully we can get his slides in, and I will stay home where my internet is a little bit more stable. So this is the first time it's happened to me, but I know other chapters have experienced this. So thanks for those of you who hung in there, and we got an abbreviated one. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, Jerry, how did your, being a Canadian, how did your interest get become so big with Babe Ruth? What's inspired you to?
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, well, I'll be happy to tell you about that. As I say, it started with my first novel, which came out 2002 in Canada, 2004 in the States. And it's a baseball novel. And there were two things that inspired that novel. One was the 1914 home run that he hit at Hanlon's Point as a member of the Providence Grays, his only minor league home run, right? So we Canadians like to say it was the first Babe Ruth home run, but it was the first a home run in an official league game, all right? Which is true, September 5th, 1914. So there was that. And there was this photograph. It was a photo of my dad, and I actually show this in one of the slides. The story is about a boy and his grandfather. And I got this photo. It was taken in 1934. My father would have been about 15. And these are Depression era kids. And there's, I don't know, 9 of them. And by the way, it was a basketball team. They were the City of Toronto Bantam basketball champions in 1934. And they're all these kids are there. This was during the middle of the Depression. My father had number 3, by the way, which I thought was kind of cool. But it's a basketball team, and they were the champions. And the boys in that picture became characters in my novel. But I didn't write about basketball. I wrote about baseball, and I wrote about Babe Ruth. So I kind of juxtaposed a few things. But the characters, the faces in that picture, they became characters in my novel. In Gift of the Bambino. So it was that photograph and the 1914 home run that came together, and that's what got me involved in writing about Babe Ruth. And even though that was a work of fiction, and it got very good reviews, by the way, both in the States and in Canada, even though it was fiction, I did a lot of research on Babe Ruth to write it. In fact, Babe Ruth is even a character in the book. So it gets into, you know, the speakeasies during the Roaring '20s in New York, and what the life was like and everything else. So that got me involved in researching Ruth, and I just kept researching. And then we had that plaque set up in Toronto in 2006. I got to know Tom Stevens, and eventually I said, you know, I think there's a story here about the legacy of Ruth that no book has really explained. And it's not a biography, it's about the legacy. So that's what we got involved with, and he was kind enough to do the foreword. And I've been in touch, and, you know, met him and his son, and Julia, of course. When I saw her, she was well into her 90s, and she was very helpful. And on one of my sites, BabeRuthLegacy.com, I've got audio interviews with people I've spoken to in this, and I've got a long interview, I don't know, an hour or so, with Julia, and she's talking about Daddy. And I tell you, it's priceless, the stuff she talks about, and she just spoke so highly of him. I just, you know, I become a Babe Ruth fan. What can I say? There's a lot more to the guy than home runs. He was quite a character for sure.
Was that his only Canadian home run?
Yeah, well, there were no Canadian teams in the major leagues back then, of course. The Toronto Maple Leaf baseball team was in the International League. And that was the only minor league home run he ever hit. It was a doubleheader. He pitched one game of the doubleheader. He pitched a 1-hit, 9-0 shutout, by the way, and hit a 3-run homer. And there's a lot of talk about what happened to that ball. There's I could do a presentation on what happened to that ball, because there was an old stadium there, and it was off the mainland in Lake Ontario. And according to my story and what I think, the ball went over the fence into the lake. Other people say someone caught it, didn't go into the lake. And there's quite a story and mystery attached to what happened to that ball. But there's a guy named Tom Volk, who was the president of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. In the early 30s, Ruth had another home run in Toronto when he was with the Yankees. It was an exhibition game against the AAA Toronto Maple Leafs baseball team. And they played in a stadium on the mainland, but it was right by the lake. And he hit a home run in this game. I think it was 1932 or something like that. It was with the Yankees. So Tom Volk told me once, he said, if two of the Babe's taters are sitting in the bottom of Lake Ontario, we should drain the lake and retrieve them. And I thought that was pretty cool, you know. But it could be, in fact, that two of them are sitting on the bottom of the lake. I don't know. They would be worth a lot of money for sure.
So it wasn't his only home run then?
I beg your pardon?
Then that wasn't his only Canadian home run if he hit another one with the Yankees.
Yeah, that was in an exhibition game, yeah.
So do you have a lot of Babe Ruth memorabilia, and what's your favorite one if you do?
Well, one of the things I show one of the slides actually, where I talk about the chapter about the Babe Ruth Museum, and well, Peter, of course, would know about this. I've got a picture of this in my book. It's supposed to be Babe Ruth's first authentic autograph, which was from St. Mary's Industrial School, where he went as a kid. And they apparently found this in the floorboards in the chapel or something like that. And it was, I believe, from 1907. So he would have been about 12 years old. And this is at the Babe Ruth Museum. And I show this on a slide. It's got the St. Mary's, it's got like the book, the prayer book. And the next page where he signed, he was about 12 years old. And he said, George H., he wasn't the Babe then, said George H. Ruth, world's worst singer, world's best pitcher, right? And it was with spelling mistakes and punctuation errors, by the way, which only adds to its value. So I wonder what that would be worth. Babe Ruth's first authentic autograph, it must be priceless. So that's a pretty impressive thing. But there's so many things with Ruth. As I said, when I was doing research, this website I found, the 15 most valuable items of sports memorabilia ever sold. And this was going back maybe 4 years or so. But 7 of the 15 were Babe Ruth items. And we're talking not only baseball players, we're talking soccer players, other sports all over the world. The guy is just phenomenal. So, and you know, the sweater at 4.4 million a few years ago, and then last year that record is broken. The guy who bought the jersey, by the way, in 2012 for 4.4 million, it was bought by, actually was an agent buying it for the buyer, all right? But I spoke to the guy who bought it for his secret customer. And I saw him at a National Sports Collectors Convention about a year or so ago. So the jersey was bought in 2012 for 4.4 million. I said, what do you think that jersey would be worth today? And he said it probably would fetch over $10 million. So, you know, it's pretty hard to beat that. I don't think any other athlete, certainly no other baseball player, can attach his name to things of such value. One of the baseballs Babe Ruth signed, what they call a single signed baseball. That means if Lou Gehrig's name is on the ball along with Ruth, it diminishes the value. A single signed baseball is more. One single signed baseball with Ruth's name sold for $388,000. You know, I don't know. It's just incredible the value that he brings. It's something else. There's so many items. If you go online at some of these auction houses, you will see an unending line of Babe Ruth items literally every day that are up for sale. It's just incredible. But the guy also signed his autograph so many times. I had spoken to probably the most prolific Babe Ruth autograph expert in the world. And he told me that Babe Ruth signed his name about 2 million times in his life, which I found hard to believe, but he said it's not hard to believe. And he worked it out from the, I say, late 19 teens to Ruth's death in 48, how many times he would have to sign a day. And he worked it out, and he said he did sign about 2 million times, because everywhere he went, there were masses, and he was always very obliging to the fans. So it seemed phenomenal to me. And he said there's probably another 1 million Babe Ruth signatures out there someplace, but they have to be authenticated. And that's another aspect of the industry too. Yep.
A lot of people take credit for Babe Ruth switching from a pitcher to the outfield full time.
Yeah.
I happen to know John Hooper, who was Harry Hooper's son.
Oh, yeah.
Before he passed. And John was pretty confident that his dad was the first one to talk to Babe about playing full time in the outfield. Do you have any information on that?
I don't know. I haven't heard that. And wasn't Harry Hooper the guy who said, in describing Babe Ruth, he said the first thing you have to know about him is that he wasn't human? I think Harry Hooper said something like that. But I hadn't heard that one. But I think, you know, the owners, when he starts hitting, again, you know, at this time in the 19 teens, home runs were a rarity, right? And it wasn't the holy way to play baseball. I mean, it was the Ty Cobb way, or the Wade Boggs way, if you will, hitting singles, right? That was the way to play it. Ruth comes along, starts hitting them out, and people are coming to the park. And again, this is right after the Black Sox scandal, you know, right after the war, World War I, and people were coming to the park. And the owners, one thing never changes. The thing that the owners understand the most, and this is true of any sport, is money. Revenue. I don't think that ever changes at any time. And they saw people were coming to the park. So the Red Sox made him a full-time outfielder. But if you were managing a team and a guy's hitting a home run every 3 or 4 games, and he was a pitcher, wouldn't you want him playing every day? I think I would too. So I think it was probably a natural progression. But that's what made the guy so incredible as an athlete. He would have made the Hall of Fame as a pitcher. And he became the greatest slugger the game's ever seen. Now, that's like a goalkeeper winning the NHL scoring award. You know, it's like, I don't know that it happened in any other sport. Ryozo Kato, the former US ambassador from Japan to the United States, sent me a photograph. And with him, when he was commissioner of the Nippon Professional Baseball, it's a photo of 2 of the top players in the league that year. And one of them was Shohei Ohtani. He was 17 years old. I don't know, what is he, 6'4", 6'5"? And he sent me this photograph, and they're calling Ohtani the second Babe Ruth. Well, Ohtani might be an incredible athlete, but I think it's a little unfair and premature to say he's the second coming of Babe Ruth. I don't think there is another Babe Ruth, and I don't think we're going to see one. I just don't think. The guy was phenomenal. That's why I didn't like seeing William Bendix play him in the 1948 movie, and then John Goodman playing him in the one in the 90s. It was horrible seeing that. This was a guy who had impeccable eye-hand coordination, and you know, to see these guys portraying Babe Ruth, I thought was sacrilege, really. But the real definitive movie about Babe Ruth has never been told, which is amazing because he's got an incredible story, and a decent movie about Babe Ruth has never been made. So I'm open to any more.
I have a question on the first home run in Toronto. Where does that park still exist, and where is it?
No, it was Hanlon's Point Stadium. The park actually had burned down at one point. This home run was in 1914. And on the site now, there's an airport, a small airport called the Toronto Island Airport. Well, I don't think too many planes have been taken off there this year, but It's the Toronto Island airport called the Billy Bishop Airport, who was the World War I flying ace, by the way, Billy Bishop. His daughter actually is a friend of mine. She's an author. So that airport is at the site where the where the old ballpark used to be. And we had the plaque right on the site where we think the ball probably was hit from. Okay, so what you have there now is a runway. So the baseball field hasn't been there for a long time. But we thought it's worth commemorating for sure.
How do you get there from downtown?
You have to take the ferry. A ferry goes across from the ferry terminal to the islands. Hamlin's Point is there's a few islands there, and you have to take the ferry across. It's about a 20-minute ride or so, unless you're a good swimmer, I suppose. But people take the ferry.
How many islands are out there that are inhabited?
There are people who live there. They're like, cottages. There's not a lot of people there, but they're trying. It's like a parkland. It's, they have amusements for kids. It's a popular place. There's Center Island, Hamlin's Point. I'm sure this summer was unlike any other summer. I don't even know if those ferries were operating. Probably not. But it's a very popular place, and tourists like to go there when they come here. But there's no ballpark there anymore.
That's good. I've been to 47 major league ballparks.
Yeah.
The absolute worst was Exhibition Stadium.
Oh yeah.
In Toronto, where it was in 1988.
Yeah, well, that's where the Blue Jays first played, and no, that wasn't a ballpark at all. And even though when they had the Sky Dome, which they now call, the Rogers Center, it's not one of my favorites either. It's a very impersonal construction, and in fact, the old ballpark, the Toronto Maple Leaf baseball team used to play, where I mentioned Ruth hit his home run in the early 30s. It was called Maple Leaf Stadium. That was a lovely old stadium, because when I was a kid, I used to go there with my family. We used to go to a lot of baseball games. And that was it wasn't a big stadium. It had maybe, 30,000 seats, but it was a baseball stadium. It was outdoor. It was natural, and it had the smell. And you don't get that in, the Rogers Center at all. So I prefer those kinds of stadiums, like Camden Yards in Baltimore. They're great stadiums. Yeah.
Where was the Maple Leaf ballpark? Was that downtown? And how close is it to where Rogers is now?
You mean the one on the islands?
No, the Maple Leaf Stadium.
Oh, Maple Leaf Stadium. Well, I don't. If you know Toronto, it's at the foot of Bathurst Street. So it's actually, it's not really that far from where the Rogers Center is right now, but it was right on the shore of the lake. Right there, which is, the earlier comment about hitting one out, it may have gone into the lake. It was right on the water. I remember as a kid going there, and you'd see the boats coming in, and, they were right off the home run fence. You could see all the boats. So it was pretty nice. It was a nice place, but that was, I think, torn down in, 1967, 68, something like that. They tore it down. Now there's condominiums there.
What's on the site now? Condominiums?
Yeah, condominiums. Yeah, I think half of Toronto is condominiums today.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Guys? I know this was abbreviated.
Yeah. Perfect job.
Good job, Jerry.
Okay.
Limitations. We'll get you set up. I'll figure out what works for you, and we'll get you in sometime in October.
Yeah, and it can be fairly short. We'll just show slides and the videos, which I think are pretty interesting. So we can do it pretty quickly, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you prefer an evening instead, that we can.
Whatever. Yeah, for sure.
So guys, obviously you're on our email list. Just be on the lookout. Anybody interested in submitting an article for the next CHOP? Trying to get it out probably at the end of October. So please go. SABR 50, obviously, is going to be in 2021. I'm on the planning committee, so we're going to regroup in October and start hashing that out, and hopefully won't have to postpone it again. And 2 weeks left in the regular season, I guess.
Oh, wow. Short season.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
The Orioles have done better than any of us thought so far.
yeah, can't complain. So now it'll be interesting with the bubble playoffs and see how that goes for the first time.
Right.
They're playing at the Giant. Is the World Series? I don't know. I haven't read, but is everything going to be in Arlington at the new Giant?
Arlington, California.
Well,
Okay.
the American League playoffs are going to be in Los Angeles, I think, or no, in San Diego. San Diego. They got it backwards. The American League's playing in National League parks, and the National League's playing in American League.
American League.
Oh.
And the
The
World Series.
National League's going to Minute Maid Park in Houston. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you guys learned something today. We'll make it a little bit more spicy and interesting next time around. I see all the familiar faces, so.
Yeah. Bob, did you see my message there? I sent
About
it-
Harry Hooper? Yeah.
About Harry Hooper. Yeah.
Yeah. And I am getting those trivia. Yes.
Yeah.
If nothing else, no, the website isn't done yet, so don't expect it until probably closer to Christmas. I just had too much on my plate. Other than that, downtown, it's only about 60 degrees in downtown Baltimore right now. So autumn is
It's
finally,
60 it's 64 in Annapolis. It's cool.
yeah. So the Orioles, I think, play the Braves again today.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, this has been recorded, but I'm sure it's not that great. I'm sure Jacob will put it up, and then we have a better one next month. We'll replace it. So thank you, Jerry. Thanks for putting up with all the glitches. And anybody else have any last minute thoughts or questions? Our president, Mr. Brown, was at the hospital today to see his knee doctor. So that's why he wasn't with us. It's for a checkup with his knee replacement type stuff.
We wish him
Other
well.
than that, yeah, we all have bumps and bruises. We're all not Cal Ripken like and surviving everything. So I guess that's about it. I'm going to head home and apologize last time, and next time we'll make sure we get it right. So,
I thought Jerry did an excellent job.
all right, guys.
Really interesting.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you,
guys.
fellas. Okay,
We'll
thanks,
be in
Peter.
touch soon.
Okay.
Have a great week,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
You too.
Stay
Bye-bye.
safe.
They were well.